Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that slow down journey this week to linger in those two Psalms, Psalm 73 and Psalm 77. There's a lot in there, and we could probably spend another week on those two Psalms. I wanted to revisit tonight Psalm 73, when the wicked prosper. I think we've all been there. Maybe we're all there right now where we look around and the wicked, the arrogant, the proud, the evildoers, whatever words you pick from Psalm 73, seem to be the people who are flourishing, seem to be the people who are going unscathed, unjudged, unrepentant, and without having to pay any kind of penalty for their actions. And it's not just that the wicked are prospering, but the flip side of that seems to us in many moments that the righteous are not flourishing. And the crisis of faith comes because what we're seeing with our eyes and perhaps experiencing in our own circumstances seems to contradict the very promises of God. The Deuteronomic blessings, if you choose life, if you choose faithfulness, if you choose obedience, I will bless you. And if you don't, then you'll experience the curses and the punishments. And what we see seems to contradict that. And that's exactly what the psalmist in Psalm 73 was dealing with. And one of the things I love about this psalm is how this psalmist keeps it real. I have a young friend who that would be her greeting to me, or her despedida, her farewell to me. Keep it real, Aunt Rachel. And the psalmist keeps it real here. First, he keeps it real in his honest and accurate assessment of his own experience, of his own choices in the midst of that crisis of faith. I don't know if you noticed in Psalm 73 what the psalmist says about himself. Verse 3, I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. And then in verse 21, I was embittered. My soul was bitter, and I was pricked in my heart. Have you felt those feelings? The envy of those who are prospering, the bitterness of heart over the fact that they seem to do whatever they want and get away with it and just make more money or more fame or more whatever. And then the psalmist is also really brutally honest about what was happening to him because of his choices. Envy and bitterness were doing something to him. And he says in verse 22 of Psalm 73, I was brutish and ignorant. In other words, I was subhuman. I was more like an animal than like a human being designed to reflect the image of God. I was like a beast towards God. That's radical honesty. And for the psalmist to be able to move on, to be able to make the pivot that we see him making in this psalm, he had to be honest about where he was and about the sinful choices that he was making in the midst of his crisis of faith. This is a psalmist, a person of faith, who made the choice to reorient his thinking process, to reorient his attitudes. We see the psalmist doing what Paul encouraged those early Christians to do when he told them, set your eyes on the things above in Colossians 3. or when he urged them to be renewed in the thinking of your minds in Romans chapter 12. So the change that takes this psalmist from the crisis of faith through the crisis of faith out onto the other side into a renewed and reestablished faith is radical honesty. There has to be that openness before the Lord to say, this is where I am. Everything I see seems to contradict your word, and I have allowed it to eat away at me, to embitter my heart, and to harden my spirit. And then the second thing I noticed in this psalm is one that Dr. Russell highlighted, that this psalmist makes the choice not to isolate himself in his crisis of faith, not to wrap himself up in that cloak of bitterness and to keep turning over and over in his mind the same thoughts and the same observations about the wicked. He makes the choice to go to the sanctuary, to put himself in the context of the worshiping people of God. Notice verse 16. When I thought how to understand this, it seemed to me a wearisome task until, verse 17, I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I discerned their end. And how did he discern their end? He tuned his ears and his hearts to hear the story again. Verse 17, or verse 18, truly, you, that is God, set them in slippery places. You make them fall to ruin. How they are destroyed in a moment, swept away utterly by terrors. The psalmist said, I'm going to put myself in the place where the story of God is told over and over and over again by the people of God, where God's perspective on reality is set up as truth. And I'm going to let that perspective work in me to reveal where my thoughts are not aligned with that telling of the story. And I'm going to confess those, and I'm going to repent of those, and I'm going to reorient my thinking, align it, realign it with the story that God is telling. Discernment came to the psalmist in the sanctuary, where people were reading and telling and singing and enacting the story of God. And that is exactly what happens for us when we find ourselves in a crisis of faith. For whatever reason, whatever it is that we're observing or experiencing that makes us doubt or question the truth of God's promises, the place to confront that crisis is not alone. It's not in isolation. It's right there in the midst of the people of God. As we sing the songs and the hymns that tell the story, as the scriptures are read, as the word is proclaimed, as we, with our bodies, take the sacrament, all of those things together are exactly what we need to move through the crisis of faith on to the other side. And all of us, as the gathered people of God, do this for each other. We don't know from Sunday to Sunday who it is in our midst that is in this crisis of faith. And so together we sing and we speak and we proclaim and we take into our bodies the sacrament as a way of telling the story. And we do that. Excuse me. We do that for each other. And so, my sisters, I encourage you not to neglect the gathering together of the people of faith. Whether you're in the crisis of faith or whether you're helping someone else walk through that, we need to be together and we need to tell the story in word and song and sacrament and get us through to the other side where our thoughts are once again aligned with the thoughts of God. So God bless you, my sisters. Join with each other this week in worship.